Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. The topic that set the internet on fire this week is, what is a brutally honest assessment of the military situation, aka defense situation, in Ukraine in 2024 coming into 2025? And today with us, we have a guest that's going to help us answer this question.
Good morning, people. My name is Glenn Grant. I'm a former British Army Lieutenant Colonel with 37 years service. And since then, I've been working doing defence reform in something like 10 countries in Europe, including Bulgaria, but primarily in the last 10 years in Ukraine. So I'm in and out all the time and trying to work with the Army, which was a bit of a failure, but now moving more towards civil society to try and educate people so they understand what a good defence force should look like. And that's my work.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for your service, and thank you for helping our military and, well, our defense force in general become better, because boy, do we need that, especially in these circumstances. What do you, in your opinion, think are the biggest accomplishments and failures of the Ukrainian military today?
Well, if you go back to 2024, I mean, the biggest failure, without a shadow of a doubt, is to follow the rules. There are lots of rules for military that have grown up since, I suppose, since the 1700s, when formal militaries actually came into being. And those rules include things like, selection of commanders, structures, organizational structures, especially organization of logistics and support, how much you need to do things, what you need to do things. And we've been breaking those rules all the time. And the biggest one on the front line is this not actually having clarity of who is doing what and where. Far too many verbal orders, because commanders don't want to write things down, but they should be. And so we've got a mess on the front line, and that's been the highlight of 2024 is the organizational mess on the front line, which now people are beginning to realize. So as we come to the end of 2024, there is a growing understanding that organizational mess cannot continue. I think at the beginning of 2024, people didn't realize what it was. Now, more and more soldiers are speaking out. NCOs and officers are speaking out, and it's become more clear that, especially now, even more than anything, is this sort of trying to create these ridiculous units where nobody's trained, and then putting them into the front line, and all we end up with is dead people. Yeah. Because you cannot make a unit. I mean, I remember before the Falklands War, the commanding officer of 3rd Para was talking to a group of us on one of the exercises, and said it takes 4 years to make a really high-class, world-class working infantry battalion. And that's starting off with people. That's not collecting them from the beginning. That's starting off with good people. So to create the team takes that long. And when you actually look at a football team, I mean, teams and teams of professionals, and they still don't get it right. And there's only 11 of them. And here we are asking brigades with 3,000 to get something right that is infinitely much more complex than a game of football. Yeah. So, that's been the highlight of 2024 for the Army for me, is just this inability to understand things.
Do you think that, so there's this situation, right, where there's already too little people. A lot of the people that are being mobilized, they get like, a week, 2, 3, maybe maximum month of training. They get thrown into situations where their mental health severely suffers, because obviously they're unprepared to be there. Yeah. And that, that sort of doesn't only create problems for them, but creates problem for the prepared soldiers that then basically suffer because of these people's inability to behave themselves at the front line on a mission. How do you think that can be fixed in the situation where you're constantly lacking people?
But we're not constantly lacking people. We've got people. We're just moving them around. I mean, if you actually go to the books and see how many people are being paid, and then you'll suddenly say, "Hey, come on, where are all these people? Don't tell me they're all doing they're all doing logistics, because they're not. There are literally tens of thousands of people who are in, I'm going to call them non-jobs around the system. There are lots of people who perhaps we should get rid of and use the money for something else, or we should downgrade a lot of these people, because we've got an awful lot of senior people walking around like colonels who actually are no more than sergeants in their abilities. So, the whole of the back needs looking at. If you look around Lviv or Kiev on any day, there are lots and lots of soldiers walking around who are not injured, who are healthy, who are wearing clean uniform. So, the whole system needs a root and branch reform in that respect. Jumping back to the training thing, I mean, the problem is cultural. The problem is cultural. Is that in the Ukrainian army, a general has about the same power as a sergeant in the American army. So he refuses to do anything, because delegation is not written. And if you don't write delegation and authority, you say you are delegated to do this, you are authorized to do this with my power. So if the army commander doesn't do that from the top, then no one does it on the way down. So no one feels powerful enough to actually to make changes. So they don't. They don't. And then if you don't have power, you don't have authority, you don't make changes. So you end up going through the same thing time and time and time again in the training areas. And unfortunately, we are also beset by the problem that some of the grand leaders keep stealing people from the training before they are properly trained, and sending them to the front line. And of course, what does it do? I mean, they
Creates
die.
problems. Yeah.
So in fact, all we're doing is we're running out of people by death,
Yeah.
instead of actually having the opportunity to see what these people can do if they are properly trained.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot about this. Obviously, I'm seeing a lot of this myself. I'm personally from Lviv. I don't live there, but I do go there quite often to visit family, and there are a lot of uniformed soldiers walking around Lviv kind of aimlessly. We also have these training centers in Yavoriv and other places around Lviv area that kind of train soldiers for a week or two. And if you go to the training centers, there are not enough instructors. Some of the instructors are foreign, and they just kind of come there to drink and do nothing. And it ends up being this kind of cluster where a lot of soldiers just end up being there for 2 weeks, not learning anything. And then they are issued their weapon and they end up at the front, and they're not prepared to be there. There is also this issue that's been raised obviously quite a lot by Western leaders in the past year, which is the lowering the age of mobilization. What are your thoughts on that? Lowering mobilization to 18.
I don't agree with that at the moment, because although I know very well that 18, 19-year-olds are much more physically able than 40-year-olds. There's no question about that. You've only got to look at Olympic performances to see the ages of people. There are not many 40-year-olds, lots of 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
I think that there certainly should be, as with Azov, the openness to recruit people who want to fight, who are 18, 19 years of age. And perhaps we can do a better job of that, but not actually formally bring them in at the moment. For the reasons that people have said, the actual mathematics of the numbers is not good, and wouldn't be good for the long term of the country. But recruiting people who want to fight, yes, we should, of that age. By the way, 3 Para, when it went to the Falklands, the average age was 19 of the whole battalion. So including all the commanders.
Oh, wow.
And the commanding officer, who was in his 40s. Yes, oh, wow. Oh, wow. So the youngest boys were just over 17 and a half.
That's crazy. I mean, that sounds crazy. You know, a 17 years old is like barely. It's not an adult. It's an adolescent. I don't know if I can imagine a 17-year-old boy being thrown in a situation like that. Which I'm glad that you mentioned problems that it creates in the long term for Ukraine, because I think that a lot of leaders are sort of not looking at the fact that we're having a huge demographic crisis, and 18, 19,
Yeah.
20-year-olds, well, 20 to 22 is when you usually have your first child in Ukraine, right? Or like 21 to 22.
Yes.
So these boys, they don't have families yet. And so if they go and they die at the front, especially while, weapons are not being sent over here or delivered in the right time frames in which they're promised, or while all of these like logistical issues occur, it's basically sending people to death who could have procreated and prevented
Yeah.
a demographic crisis from growing, which we already have, so much to deal with that. And I know it sounds so kind of apathetic, but taking away the personal factor of it is we have young boys that need to have families before they go to the front. Because we're already having the situation where there's so many single women that don't have families yet, and not many single men that don't have families yet, because a lot of them, they're fighting, a lot of them are not in this country, a lot of them are no longer with us. So I'm very glad that you've mentioned this, because I feel like I have a very hard time explaining this to foreigners, especially not having military expertise. So I usually have to defer
Yeah.
to my grandfather, who works at one of Ukraine's leading military universities, and kind of cover myself with his expertise. So it's nice to have someone say it on record. What do you think? What do you think are the key things that need to happen for Ukraine to make progress in 2025 in terms of what the front line looks like? And with that question, do you think Russia is going to take such key cities as like Kharkiv and Kherson, and the cities that everyone is talking about currently?
What what happens on the front line depends totally upon what decisions Zelensky makes. There's no question about that. Or Ermak. Let's be brutal about it. The pair of them, what decisions they make. If they leave the current defense system as it is, then we will lose cities. We'll lose more than one city. We may lose 2 or 3 major cities, because the senior leadership is failing in the military. I mean, there's so much evidence. It's enough for a conviction. Let's just say that in court. So there has to be change if we want to win, and that means there has to be change of leadership with younger people and people with business experience. Because what we're lacking is planning generally, communication, and just thinking, intellectual thinking experience. I'm sorry, but the senior leadership is intellectually poor.
Yeah.
And it stands out. There may be good people, there may be good grandfathers in many cases, but that's not what we need. What we need is vitality, youth, good leadership, honest leadership, not sacking people because they come up with an alternative view. In fact, they're the ones who should be promoted, the ones who have an alternative view, not sacked. And this is a problem. So these things are linked. If you don't change, we're going to keep going backwards. If we do change, we have a fighting chance of that. Now, that's the first bit in the military side. The second part is society. And I think in many ways, more important is the role of society in making its voice heard. Now, each year, society has said more. I mean, 2024 was by far away the best and strongest that society has been in the country since the war started 11 years ago. 2025, they've got to be stronger again. They've got to start. The voice of society has got to be heard, and that great expression, "Up with this, we shall not put." We've had enough.
Yeah.
And Zelensky's got to understand that you can't ride roughshod over society and just kill them all. That it's not going to work because it isn't. So society needs to firstly speak louder. Secondly, read and understand more. I think that some of the better opinion formers actually need to dig into the military books, into the military history, and into military discussions with other countries, and listen to it. Yes, form their own opinions for Ukraine. Yes, form their own views for how culture affects how things work in Ukraine. But society has got to become stronger and say we cannot just keep losing cities. We have to actually to do things differently. And I would add one final point in this. It is people that are going to do this. It's not more F-16s. It's not some grand IT system coming out of the Ministry of Defence that, by the way, do nothing to the front line, because people are not going and looking at what does the front line need in terms of IT. Nobody's getting rid of the paper, for example. The paperwork war and the covering up your ass with paper goes on all the time. And that's straightforward lack of senior leadership. The senior leadership are too, in the main, I'm sorry, but too cowardly to actually to take on the problems in the system. And society has to change that.
Well, realistically, I agree with everything you said. I think realistically, the problem is that we have a hybrid army, right? Where there is lots of Soviet leftovers that are dragging everything down, and then there are lots of new people that are trying to progress, but because the Soviet people are above them,
Yes.
they can't progress, right? So we have a lot of young, very capable leaders that are not being promoted to generals, although they should be, that planned defenses of whole cities, right, and held them and understand how this particular war looks. And then we have generals in Kyiv who haven't seen the battlefield in the past 30 years that just sort of, deal with paperwork. And I think that that's one of the biggest issues for sure, because we need to have people who know what this war is and what this war needs and what this war's problems are, based on their experience, lived experience at the front, not based on a report, because of course you're not going to know what to do with it if you haven't experienced it, especially if your last war was, I don't know, in Afghanistan 30 years ago or something like that with the Soviet military,
I think it's even more than that. It's because you can experience it, but a lot of these people have experience fighting, but it doesn't mean to say that they've grasped the lessons or understood what it all means at the organizational level. I mean, the problem is that the senior level is about business.
Yeah.
It's about value for money. It's about understanding that each man costs this much to recruit, this much to train, this much to equip, this much, and that every time you lose one, you've got to go through that financial process again.
Yeah.
And so a dead man costs you more than a live man. And that means that it's stacking up. The money is stacking up. And nobody in the Ministry of Defence has got any grasp of this financial activity at all. They don't even think about it. They don't understand it. And if you don't understand that, you can't then go into the next steps of how do we save money? What is it we've got to do? And why must we not lose people? Why do we have to fight differently so that we don't lose people? What cost of drones, cost of missiles, cost of things? How do we get value for money on each one of them? Is there any assessment? No, I can tell you there isn't. Not at all. Not even a little bit.
Yeah, but also, I mean, generals that send soldiers as cannon fodder, right? Like that's a big issue, because we do have some really good units where you can trust your commander, and then we have units where your commander doesn't care. He just needs results, and to him, results look like sending a bunch of guys into an assault where they shouldn't be in an assault position at all. So, I mean, I guess, yes, army reform is something that has been talked about quite a lot, and I do think that it should happen for sure. I agree that F-16s are not going to do the work, but I will say that we do need more weapons, as in, like, we do need a constant flow of weapons, and we need them to arrive on time, because when they don't, it does screw up planning and logistics quite a
It
bit.
does. It does. It does. It does. But if your front line is not properly equipped first, then all the big stuff in the world won't make any difference to it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. All the long-range missiles and everything will not change the fact of what's happening on the front line. The front line is basics. It's mortars that have got the proper powder in them,
Yeah.
so that you can kill people, and you know, the right boots for the winter, and the right gloves for the winter, and things like this.
Yeah.
That's what keeps people alive.
Yeah.
The small stuff is what keeps them alive. Night sights.
Hand
You've got night
warmers, night
sights. You've got
sights.
a greater chance of staying alive and being alive at the beginning of the spring.
Also,
And
I think they call them invisibility cloaks now. Those that
oh, they're new, and they're expensive. Yeah, they are. But I mean, I've seen nothing written about those. Nothing spread around the.
Russians are using a lot of them. Russians are
Yeah,
using
but
a
I've
lot
seen
of
nothing
those.
written. I've seen nothing written about it in terms of, you know, demand, trying to get America or another country to pay for those. Maybe they have. And cars. We still need cars.
Lots of
Hundreds and
cars.
thousands of them.
Vehicles are one of the most fundraised for items,
Yeah,
with most
I know.
volunteers and most civilian fundraisers. I have personally fundraised for vehicles before, and one of the biggest things that soldiers request are drone equipment and vehicles, I think, and Starlinks. Which I hope are going to be substituted with whatever it is that Europe is developing this year that they think they can finish by 2025 that can rival Musk's.
I think that there is a Ukrainian company that has already developed something
Fantastic.
already.
Well, I think one of the things that is really good in Ukraine is defense tech. I think that's one of the areas that sort of like outdid itself to anyone's expectations, because in the past 3 years we went from not having any defense tech at all to having quite a bit of defense tech, and quite far-fetched defense tech that no one thought would be possible to make in this country in such a short period of time. So that's one positive. What do you think, like, how do you see the events unfolding in 2025 as of right now, or scenarios that you can give me based on like what could happen?
Oi. Well, I mean, again, we go back to Zelensky, don't we?
Yeah.
And the first scenario is that he does nothing and he carries on with the same team that he's got.
Yeah.
And we just keep going backwards and backwards and backwards.
Yeah.
Without any. The second scenario will be that we go backwards until we lose Kharkiv. And at that point, then there's another Maidan, because people then say, "Up with this, we have reached the limit."
Yeah.
And that's a possibility. The third scenario has to be that Zelensky realizes he's in a mess, and that even an election is not going to help him, because if he wins, the mess is still there, because Russia is not going to stop. Russia is hell bent on big war. There's no question. It's hell bent on big war. You don't bring in your friends from North Korea unless you're actually going somewhere. So that the third scenario would be that you know, or maybe he gets re-elected, but then it all just carries on.
Yeah.
And I suppose the fourth one is he makes dramatic, ruthless change, and brings in 3-4 of the young brigade commanders to clears out most of the general staff.
Yeah.
Although I hear that there are lots of good people in the general staff. The problem is they're not allowed to be good people.
Yeah.
So you know, clears out that top level of Soviet, and takes the risk of the youngsters actually doing things. And it's not a risk. This is the problem. It's not a risk. I mean, in Estonia, when they did this with police, they cut the top level off completely, reduced the numbers to almost a third. It's about the year 2000. And the number of convictions or number of cases solved trebled in the space of a couple of weeks, because all these young officers had not been allowed to actually to do their job, which is what we see here. When they were allowed to, suddenly big change. So I think that you know, that would be the preferred scenario, because it's it's the only one that I see, the only way that I see we're going to win in,
Yeah.
or at least turn the tide in 2025.
Well, yeah, because the scenario with Maidan would actually put Ukraine in a lot more trouble, because Russia would use that as a distraction in order to push more positions and in order to gain more. Because obviously, when there are people revolting,
I disagree with you. I don't think they're capable of doing that. I think they'd shout a lot. And the other thing is, I'm not sure that that yes, there are lots of people who in the European Union and in US who believe firmly that, that Zelensky is the man and the savior of the country, and therefore removing him would removing him would show that we're no longer democratic, we're no longer anything else. So there is a problem with that in Europe, no question. But there again, how many cities do you have to lose
yeah.
before before arguments start to change? I mean, Kharkiv or one of the other big cities. I mean, if they got all the way to Dnieper, for example, what would that do to to European opinion, to world opinion? People are very fickle out there.
Yeah.
They'll support people while they seem to be winners, but when they're not winners, people change quickly.
Well, I think the issue here is that we don't necessarily have someone to run against Zelensky, because no one has really been putting forth their candidature. And so the people have no clue who could substitute him, right? And it would have to be a democratic process where the people elect a leader.
Yep.
And
Correct.
the issue is we don't necessarily have a runner-up. Zelensky also did say that he wouldn't run again. He would, there is that famous interview with, I believe, Letterman, where he said, I just want this war to be over and I want to have a beer. When he was asked if he would be running again, I don't think he would be. I don't think, there's a lot of speculation of like dictatorship and concentration of power. I personally don't think he wants to be in this position much longer. I think he just sort of sees like no way out of it either. I think he's kind of like trying as best as he can to do the job that he has. But he's
But
just...
Ermak does. Ermak does.
Well, yeah.
He wants to be in that.
Yeah, but I mean, he has enough government connections to not be, I guess, dependent on Zelensky being in office to stay in office, partially. I think he's put himself in a position where he can stay in office without Zelensky being there, basically. I think that's my assessment, and I could be completely wrong. That's just how I see it. But yeah, I don't see like dictator sort of tendencies from Zelensky. I think he's just, and I feel like so bad saying this, because it's not the type of thing that you should be saying on TV about Ukraine in English, right? But when Zaluzhny was like no longer enough for what was required of him, I think Zelensky at this point is also no longer enough for what is required of him, and it's not because he's bad or, he's like not smart enough or something. It's just that at some point you reach a stage where change needs to happen, and it's very hard to do with the same mind at the helm of the situation for so long, a very rapidly changing situation. And I think it'd be very beneficial to change people around him in the cabinet who make decisions. Because obviously he's not the only person who makes decisions, right? And we have talked about Yermak. Yermak, unfortunately, is not going anywhere. It doesn't seem like he is. So at least changing the other key figures in the cabinet would really help to bring in a fresh perspective.
I think overwhelmed is the way I look at it. Overwhelmed and unable to keep up with the change.
Yeah.
The war is bringing in requirements that are moving very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's like biting off more than you can chew.
The system is still working on things from 2 years ago, in effect.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're not actually nimble enough to deal with them.
Well, there are also not enough like military savvy people in the key decision-making positions, because no one is well acquainted with the military or well versed in what needs to happen or well versed in defense, right? So it becomes kind of like this strange situation. I don't know. I think I know there were a lot of problems with Alexei Reznikov as like the defense minister because there were lots of scandals, but I think that he was a lot more apt in the role than, for instance, Umerov is. But that's just also my opinion. So I think there is a lot of people that are good people, smart people, who have been put in positions where they just simply don't belong, and they would be a lot more useful somewhere else. And I think even if not changing your entire cabinet, but maybe shuffling them around, because there are people who are smart, there are people who are driven, they're just not where they should be. And
I half agree with you, but I think there are also quite a lot of people who shouldn't be there at all.
oh yeah, of course.
Who are simply not politically savvy and
Yeah.
not technologically aware enough to deal with a modern war, to be honest. Not experienced enough of life
Yeah.
to deal with a modern war.
Well, to be fair, you know, when you said that, that actually reminded me, you know, you said we were talking about how there is no one to run against Zelensky. Actually, this might be an unpopular opinion, but Kuleba, the former foreign minister, is a person who was gaining quite a bit of traction. And then it was a very, very controversial decision to take him off his job because he, in fact, was one of very qualified people who was doing very qualified work. And I, as you know, as someone who is quite into political analysis and I'm a political reporter, he was one of my favorite government officials in terms of, like, you know, how he conducted himself and the impact that he was making. So I think maybe someone like Kuleba would have been a runner-up. But unfortunately now he's in Belgium, it is, I believe.
Yeah.
They call it the political Siberia of diplomatic relationships.
Although it is Belgium, the Belgium embassy for Belgium nation. You can say that is the case, but of course Brussels as an area gives you huge capacity to deal with, to meet NATO people and EU people. So actually, maybe for someone like him, that's even better because he won't have much nation-to-nation work to do. 1 hour a day if he's lucky. But that gives him time to network and dare I say learn from the other things that he wouldn't get otherwise. But yes, in a way, I agree with you. He's someone who has the wherewithal to actually to move the game on in a way that isn't at the moment.
Yeah, I do think that this is not the last we've heard of him, and I think that whenever there is a next presidential election, I do see his name coming up as running for president. I think that's also his ambition. He's a professional diplomat. He's been in this industry for a very long time, and he's been climbing the career ladder steadily, and he also does have a lot of support, and a lot of people do like him. He wrote a very incredible book that a lot of Ukrainians who work in the media sphere and in the sphere of fighting propaganda and understanding geopolitics always recommend. It's called The War for Reality. I don't know if you have heard about it. It's a really good book written by him. I actually personally do recommend it quite a bit. It's a very interesting, I mean, it's called The War for Reality, and then insert 3 more sentences that I will never remember. But it's basically a book that talks about how to deal with politics in a world of like misinformation and online communities and the ever-growing kind of deep fakes and stuff like that. And it's very, very interesting. It does give you a lot of advice, especially as someone who works in this field. So I mean, we did steer so far away from our original topic, but it's a very interesting conversation. So going back
maybe part of 2025.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true. I mean, since we're giving predictions for 2025, so what would be your 2025 prediction for Ukraine as a whole in terms of like what do you think will be happening geopolitically, militarily, and everything summarized together?
Well, of course, we haven't mentioned Trump and we haven't mentioned USA, and I think one has to link those plus the what they call themselves, the northern group of countries into the equation. I believe that there will be a growing realism in America that Putin is actually in a war for bust that he's not. This is not a war about Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I think that the northern European countries are going to start growing up. And I think we've seen the start of this already
Yeah.
this last week with Finland and the ships.
Yeah.
So I think that both of those things are going to impact Ukraine considerably, because the northern countries, although they may not have the world's most money, there's a lot of intellect and there's a lot of energy in those countries. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, people have been giving a huge amount of support. So I see that continuing. I think that I would see 2025. I don't see the war finishing,
Yeah, I don't
despite
either.
what Trump says, but I see it as being a turning. I see it as being a turning point,
I do too.
and that turning point will rest completely upon society and the amount of money going into the armed forces, amount of money and energy going into the armed forces from Ukrainian defense industry. So,
Agreed.
So those things. So society saying we've got to change, defense industry producing new weapons, new ways of fighting, and the army slowly turning, because it will be slow,
Yeah.
even if Zelensky it cuts the head off the worst bits.
Yeah.
It will still be slow turning. So I see 2025 as being hopefully a year of turning,
Yeah.
although we're still going to go backwards. We're not. I don't see any. We're still going to go backwards, and I think we're going to lose a major city in that time, and we've just got to be prepared that this is going to happen before we turn around and go back and get all our cities back again, which I am convinced we will, but it won't be 2025.
I do believe that 2025, I agree with you immensely. I've been saying this. I think 2025 is a very important year. It's the year of whether it's kind of like two scenarios, right? It's either we all, and by we, I mean both the Western world and Ukraine and Ukrainian leadership, we all push through and we finish Russia, or we relax and we loosen up and Russia finishes us. So I think it's sort of one of those things where 2025 is an incredibly important year to really get our bearings straight in terms of the outcome of this war. I also don't think the war is finishing in 2025, but I think that this year is going to be a turning point for this war in either direction, depending on, what we do as Western societies and the Ukrainian society versus what Russia, North Korea, and, the axis of evil, as they like to call it, does. Well, thank you so very much for having this conversation with me. I think it's one of the most brutally honest conversations I've had about the war in Ukraine and about Ukrainian political and military leadership, and I really do appreciate it. I think it's time that we all take off the rose-colored glasses and kind of admit that, criticizing the actions of the government or certain government officials shouldn't be taken as like some sort of treason. It should be taken as, on the contrary, something that should be happening and something that should give way for these government officials to listen and implement, because we're not in a position where personal offenses and ego should be standing in the way of change and development.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
We want live people, not dead people.
Yeah, we do need alive people, and we do need, we need to start fixing our demographic crisis, not mobilizing 18-year-olds, but through saving lives of people that already have families as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and God bless Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Glenn. It was fantastic to have you here, and I hope that I will have a chance to talk to you again soon. Happy New Year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year to you all. Bye-bye then. Bye.
Bye. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation and you took a lot for yourself out of it, because I certainly did, and I'm very happy that it was as brutally honest as it was. If you enjoy conversations just like that and want to hear more of conversations like that, please don't forget to follow this channel, and also obviously subscribe for all of the notifications so you don't miss the next episode when it comes out. And of course, like this video, send it to a friend, and don't forget to comment your questions, suggestions, constructive criticism, and opinions, because I read all of them and they help me greatly tailor next episodes to you. See you next time.